So now here we are with the beginning of November. Try to zoom in so that I can zoom back out again. And it's hard choice time on the naval aspect. Do I want to send my ship out one last time and try to prevent landings back here, possibly over here? Do I need to? Because this is really problematic if I let the Japanese in here while I've got this line here. Or is it time to call things off? And one question for that is, I got this Marine unit. If I'm out of ships, if I've lost every ship on my fleet, is it legal? Can I still convert the squadron? And B, do I really want to? Is it worth kind of risking this for a big unit down here that can help defend Port Arthur where nothing else really can? I gotta think about this. Russians chose not to sortie at all, which means the Japanese were able to come in there. They got some ships through the minefield without a problem. And now I'm launching an attack to try to undermine the line here. I wasn't able to commit a lot here because I had to throw points in here. I had recovery points to put in. So that was 4 plus 5 is 9. That left me, 3 points left. I spent 5 points. Oh no, 6 points on replacements. That's why 10. Yeah, so only 2 points left, which was enough to get me into there. I'm having trouble moving forward with other stuff, but I want to take Port Arthur before the game ends, and there isn't a whole hell of a lot of game left, so I got to do that, and I got to try to crack this line. It looks like it's going to be a tough job for the Japanese, even though maybe things went their way pretty heavily anyway. We'll see. What's my victory points at right now? My victory points is at 18, and my Togo points is at 14. That means I'm at 32. This is worth 25. That puts me to 57. 62, 72, that's victory if I can get that far, as of right now. Now, obviously, there's possibility of losses and other factors in play, but that's where we are. Since I'm glad I didn't position a unit back here to prevent retreats because it would be out of supply right now, I got a disruption on the defender, which means they're just going to have to pay more of those Port Arthur replacement points to bring things back up to speed. And pretty soon, this turn, I'm going to have that big Marine unit that I can throw into play there. I believe that can leave Port Arthur. These garrison units cannot. So that's a factor there. The attack here undermined the line, destroyed a unit. That is one of these fairly big divisions. That's going to be 2 more victory points for the Japanese. I have a bunch of die rolls to make there. And this line's basically collapsed. It's got to pull out. Here, we made some ground and actually pushed forward a little harder than I might have intended. But I've got zones here protecting, so I feel like I can kind of push this forward. If my supply lines get cut, well, they're probably being cut by weak units that I can punch out of the way fairly easily. So I think the Russian line is collapsing right now. Over here. Here it has collapsed, and I have to just pull out. And it's not going to be trivial because of the advance into this space. I can't just rail my way out. I've got to kind of work my way up towards Tumosenga. Hit a new stage where Colonel Akashi's can have an effect on play. And in fact, we also have the potential of the winter, which I have to make a roll for. I don't remember what that was. I told you it just a few moments ago. So this went up above 20. So now I have to check. Now the die roll was a 3, which took us up to 22. Only on a 1 is there a problem. I think it's a 5 or a 6 for winter. I find this rule book, for being so small and not terribly hard to read, really annoying as a reference. I have to flip through it regularly to find these special cases in a way that could probably have been alleviated by giving a decent player aid to the players. There's a lot of information on the map. It's very hard to read and find, and some of that's necessary. You don't find, well, here we've got it here. For the most of the stuff on the map, I don't see the winter stuff there, so now I gotta find it in here somewhere. And it's not there. I mean, it's somewhere in here, and you know, I keep taking these steps away because I have to look for this damn thing. I think it's on a 5 or a 6. I lose 2. But basically I have to read through the whole rule book again and again to try to find these special cases, because there's not easy, you know, for example here where reinforcements come in, there's nothing that easily throws it in. Rail movement capacity, no, that's not it. It's not in the sorties. I don't know where it is, you know, and that's just a regular occurrence with this, which, you know, is what takes it beneath a magazine game for me. At least the old SPI ones. Certainly there are others that have been problematic in this sort of way. I'm trying to figure out what my Russian reinforcements are. And I think I'm taking these 3 divisions, but which adds up to too much, because I need to replace some units, so I'm not sure yet. I'm having the hard decision of, well, do I want to launch an attack or something? So I could launch an attack against this unit. It's a little weak. It's only 3 strength points. Maybe I could get it out of there. Maybe I could cut these guys off. What happens if they're cut off? Well, here's the problem. If they succeeded in an attack, and maybe this is supposed to represent supply overruns or something, and advance, they're in supply and don't get hurt. And, you know, can continue to operate fully normally without taking any reductions or anything. Now, of course, if they don't end up clearing the hex that they attack, that makes things not work for them, right? So there's something problematic there for them. They'd be taking a risk if I did launch an attack here. But if I do launch an attack on this weak spot right here, I do cut these guys off, and that's kind of appealing. It might be worth the risk. And that's the kind of thing I got to consider as I'm pulling out of these locations to go defend up near Liaoyang. The low number of Russian units has made this kind of problematic here, where I can't withdraw this unit through these zones. This guy could get out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 up to here. I got to make a decision. Do I want to try to get 1 division out and leave these guys to make a 10, a 1-to-1 there, a 1-to-1 there? Here I could actually kill some units and get some victory points at least if I succeed. Or I could do 17 to 8, which would get me a 2-to-1 against these guys. These guys would have a shift in their favor, so that would be 1-to-1 down 1. That's terrible. 2-to-1 at straight looks like I could actually keep these guys alive and operating in some sense. And I could push this. See, I pushed these divisions forward. I could push them forward further. I've got a nice river line. It's almost impossible to see on this map. If I pushed them forward further, I could actually have a line here, which might be of some value. I just don't have enough troops to cover everything. I could downgrade this. I bought 2 cav already, though, so that's not going to help. Artillery, I've got a couple artillery I can buy, but they're not very helpful unless I'm launching attacks. And now, yes, I'm launching attacks. I'm not sure I'm going to do this one even. I'm just kind of forming the perimeter here. If I manage the cut, that's great, but I only have a 3-to-1 attack with a shift against me. That is not terribly good for me. I'd need a 2 or a 3 to cause him to retreat. Exchanges don't really help me, except that I'd be killing a unit, and that would be worth a victory point. But as it is, I think containment is my bigger goal right now, rather than trying to cut that. I thought I could get more troops into play. I really don't have the excess available. I got kind of lucky. Cleared this hex. That means I'm in supply. I did an advance and a move back if I need to, but I don't really need to, so I have my supply line tracing this way. I moved these guys forward, but I still have the same kind of defective line in terms of 2 spaces between each unit in places. That's bad because, first of all, here, if a Japanese unit is placed here, this is just 1 space between. This guy is actually cut off again, and he's going to have to fight his way out again. Well, that's life. I mean, there's only so much I can do. I would have liked to have pushed this unit back. That would have given me a little bit more breathing room. But you can't even go every other unit here. And here I've got, 2 spaces between units, which is really damaging. The problem is the curvature of the line, really. I would have to have almost a completely flat line for me to have supply that I could trace, and I can't trace it over the mountains, so I'm kind of pinned into play over in this area here, which is not very helpful. Now over here I chose to make no attacks. I don't have a lot of points to rebuild with. I only saved myself 2. I can rebuild these guys. And yes, the Navy's in play. I turned the fleet upside down to remind me I have to replace that. So that's 3 of these Port Arthur points, and I'm down to 2 there. I only have 2 points here, which is enough to fix a division. And that looks like all I got hurt. Clever me. So now I'm out of replacements there again, but that's no big deal. And that pushes us to turn 9. And, Japan looks like it's going to have a hard time making it to here, but it's going to be a close run thing. Now, would this have been possible without maybe some of the bonuses that the Japanese got, or without... I mean, they had that fleet battle where they got tremendously bonused, or without the naval rules at all, and then extra 10 Togo points that they get. I don't know. And like I said, somebody, at least one person, more than one, has complained that the Russians have too easy a time in this game. They may not be playing with those naval rules. It may have been a mistake to decide to evacuate the fleet, because it's got to try to escape if it's going to evacuate. And the Japanese, whatever they send out, can intercept it. So I'm not really sure that I want to make an attempt at it. I know nothing of the Japanese fleet. I have no idea how many ships they have. This is probably the best chance I have of getting away, if I'm going to get away. But I'm not at a real risk yet, and there's no point in losing the point for that ship. That ship can't actually fight, I don't think. Yeah, I think it can. It can't sortie. Okay. The way this is worded is kind of weird, but the way I take it is, I can sail out to the coastal waters. If the Japanese come to the coastal waters, they fight me. And if I could make it into the open sea, I would succeed. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So basically what I'm saying is the Japanese have a chance to catch me in the coastal waters, and I have no way of escaping if they do. They will fight me. The way it's actually worded is really screwed up. The Japanese play proceeds as normal, except the Japanese must enter the coastal waters in order to have combat. If the Port Arthur fleet is able to move to the open sea box, all its ships are evacuated. Now, if I recall the sequence correctly, the Japanese get to move into the coastal waters first. Okay. So yeah, I don't have to fight if I make it to the open sea, but I will get attacked in the coastal waters. A withdrawal costs me 2 Togo points. Do I want to hold off? Do I want to assume that this is my best chance? I don't know. I'm going to go for it. And I've already decided the Japanese are going to send probably a fairly decent fleet. Half of their components out here and all their battleships. So I have chosen to go forward, and I'm going to send these in. And now we see, I'll come back and report, but we see whether or not the Japanese are able to, not quite. Hey, I think I have balance there, but it's really hard to do. I think that Japanese are able to get enough ships in, to destroy that. So, and we're probably looking at 1 more Togo point here. And the Russian ship was sunk with neither side getting crossing the T. It's actually possible like a destroyer could get crossing the T and be unable to fire and generate 3 victory points for you, which is weird as hell. But and the 1 Togo point was spent. There's damage to some of the Japanese ships. Basically, the naval game is done now. The Japanese control the sea here, and until we get to... Well, I have to roll because the Japanese fleet has to fight the final naval battle against the European fleet, which may also be a likely source of points for the Japanese. That I think that doesn't even come into play in the base game. So, another thing tilting the point value over to the Japanese, a final possibility for them to win or lose even. I mean, that could slant it the other way conceivably. So the Japanese are getting their full, they're only getting 10 points in supplies now. And the Japanese are running into some serious difficulties up in this area. I landed a bunch of stuff here to try to break through, but here's the problem. Right here, this unit was out of supply and still is. I've got to push this thing out of the way in order to get a supply line, and I put my artillery set. If I can punch my way through here, I can probably draw supply from the south, and that would be a major breakthrough that really just collapses the Russian line. But if I can't punch through here, this little salient is in a lot of trouble as it stands, because it's kind of going all out to try to save that unit. Meanwhile, obviously, I'm going to try punching through here, and I think here as well. And then over here, we're continuing the siege of the Port Arthur line, which has gotten tougher. But we have 6-1 on the fort table, which is getting about as good as it gets. We'll take a look at that. 2XR. Okay, so I'm getting the space, but I've got to lose 22 points of crap before I retreat. And I'll take care of the other battles and come back. And the results are major successes for the Japanese. Over here we punched through and we advanced into here. We're not out of supply because we got our points. Now I don't think I'm able to recover this point unit here. I'll have to look at that. But we punched all the way through, and now we can take this unit out on our next turn. Let me check the recovery, whether that just requires that we be in supply or that we do something a little bit more than that for spending our replacement points. Recovery. Can't do it while in an enemy zone of control, so pushing forward like that would not allow us to recover. I've been recovering units in zones of control. I don't know who that's helped more, or how much. I wasn't really paying attention to that. The zones don't extend into the fort, but some of these areas here, I'm going to have to evacuate them and let other units come into defense. This guy's out of supply now, so he's not going to be available. He's not going to be able to move there. These guys can recover though, because they're, oh no, this is no longer a fort. Japanese are going to have trouble pushing that attack forward, because they're not going to be able to recover those. I have a lot of recovery points. That may not be a wise move to push forward that hard. I can always bring more troops forward. That's going to cost me 2, 4, 6 of my recovery points. These guys can't recover either. I don't know. I need these guys here to cut this off though. Yeah, well, I'll go with this positioning. That leaves a big 9-point unit here. It's not in a fort, but it'll be harder. It'll be hard to take out anyway. The Russians just don't have a lot of points here. So yeah, I may have been moving too quickly, which might be favoring the Japanese here in terms of the recovery. I wonder if that was from the original game. I probably ought to look that up. See if they had that restriction on recovering units, because that makes a big difference. If forces are able to recover easily, that helps the situation. So for example here, this is what I do instead, because of the attack that was made there, so that I can recover this unit. The most important thing is that I punched through here and over here, so I can trace a line of supply around the Russian army. And now the Russians have to fall back and try to defend a pretty big opening without a lot of troops, really. And the Russians over here pulled back, replaced some units. They bought what they could with replacements, which isn't, they're out now. Port Arthur is pretty much doomed to attrition. The question is there enough time to take it out? Because we are at only 3 more turns left. Now that's the big 25 points hiding in Port Arthur. I need one more thing. I need Liaoyang or Mukden. One of those two causes it to fall, or both of these, but that looks difficult. The Russian line has kind of pulled away a little bit. You can see in here that the Japanese have a lot more room to move. Over here they also threw themselves behind, I don't know what river that is, it doesn't say on it, but behind the river line there, they had a unit stuck here that got itself killed, giving the Japanese a couple more victory points. At this point we're at 26 and 15 is 41. That means we're 29 short. 25 here. That means in this, we don't even need to get any further. So the Russians pretty much have to hold Port Arthur for the win, I think, at this point. Of course, the big naval battle, Fukushima or whatever, is a possible gain for them, but it looks pretty likely for the Japanese. Unfortunately, I think I did cheat a little bit in favor of the Japanese by allowing that resupplying units that were engaged. That allowed them to maybe push their attacks a little harder than they would otherwise. Because the well, on the other hand, the Russians were able to resupply units on the front line too, which may have hindered the ground grabbing tendency that the Japanese would have here. The Japanese continue with a battle of attrition really everywhere. Over here, they managed to get a depletion, bringing the big guns in. They're keeping extra divisions to try to crack the final load here, more than they can get on the field. I didn't choose to try to make a landing, and it's a good thing. I would have been out of supply over in any of the hexes that I would have tried to do. Over here, mainly holding the line along here, but again, an attack here that depleted the Russian force. And then here, keeping a depleted unit on the line because I don't have that much strength here. This is where my reinforcements went, other than what I'm taking for replacement points. But I managed to destroy a unit here. Actually here, using the artillery back here. And I didn't do any kind of exploitation type movement. I just grabbed my victory point for killing a unit. The main reason, although I want to get close to here, and that's appealing, I don't want to compromise my position here in this rough terrain. It could be hard to fight my way out if the Russians manage to swing around behind me, and they can trace supply through this, so it's not a safe place for me. I gotta take my recovery, and you know, I still gotta roll for recovery for these. It doesn't matter for Tsushima, so I could just say, look, the Japanese have their sea control, and stop rolling and stop dealing with that. And counterattacks over here were successful at destroying a Japanese brigade. Brought some artillery into play here. Now, in order to do this, though, I had to create a weakness in my line here. I stretched out across here along the river line, but there's a way across now. From this hex into either one of those. So that now this is more of a defect, and that line could break fairly easily, comparatively. However, there's some heavy units in the front line there, and I'm hoping that they can hold out against the Japanese. Down here, things are looking a little less pleasant. We're seeing some forces still in the way, and these are in clear terrain. There's nothing going in favor of them there, but they're kind of slowing the Japanese down and just hoping that they can prevent the fall of the inside Lushun here of Port Arthur itself. As long as if we can do that, I think we've got the victory in the game. But if Port Arthur falls, we're clearly out of the way. On the other hand, if this just breaks down, getting a couple of these, I'll probably give the same, that's the same 20 points. And I'm counting on 25 though, so it's got to be a pretty significant chunk of Manchuria that falls if Port Arthur doesn't. But how likely is this to hold? Not very. So we'll see. Well, if I didn't screw something up, I'm here on the second to last turn. A little feeling like that moved a little too quickly, like I might have moved the marker twice. But that threw me into a panic. And in that panic, it meant all my Japanese reinforcements have landed here to try to bust my way through here. I want to take Darien. That's important because that becomes a supply source, which might be of some value towards further pushing in. And then this, if I can get a retreat, that whole stack is destroyed. That's cool. So this got me an extra odds shift, even though I'm risking another unit up there. Over here, I'm finally able to attack this side and this side of this line. I'm going to try to collapse the whole Russian left flank here. The right flank looked weaker, but less valuable. The rail line's up this side. I think I've got a pretty powerful chance of bypassing this center unit, cutting it off, and forcing it to attack. Speaking of being forced to attack, the Russians have to shoot their way out of here. Now this is clear terrain. No, that's rough as well. So I don't know which one they want to get, but they have some chance of getting out of there alive. Here, they're trying to blast their way through this unit. I've spread out my defenses here. We'll see what they're able to get out of it. Doesn't look good right now. The results, quite frankly, were not as good as the Japanese needed. They didn't bust this unit out of here. They did take Darien. This guy's out of supply though. He's destroyed. I counted the 5 victory points on the track, even though those can be counted easily. I kind of like keeping a victory point track that includes everything. Now, of course, the Togo points can't be included in there. But right now I am at 33, 43, 48. I don't know how much I'm going to get off Shinga, but it's probably not that much. So I've got one more turn, and I don't see a way that I can get the Port Arthur main city that way. Likewise, here I didn't make very good gains trying to come around the corners. The Russians got retreats. Of course, this unit's out of supply. This unit has a supply line that it can trace out right out the back because there's nothing cutting now. The Russians may want to abandon this unit to try to make sure that they can form another solid line. At this point in the game, saving a unit and the victory points that's worth isn't worth the possibility of a breakthrough down the rail line, I don't think. Over here, the Japanese were unlucky. Well, maybe not unlucky, unsuccessful. They got one unit out, but this unit shouldn't have even attacked. It's a fairly large unit, but now it's out of supply after having taken losses, and they didn't get their advance that they would have needed. So we're looking at a division and 2 brigades, which probably works out to like 4 victory points that I lose. So the points just aren't there if I don't take Port Arthur. That's pretty clear, and I don't think I can get Port Arthur with what I have here. I have only one unit that I can recover, which is this one, because I can't recover in zones of control. So that's what, 1 recovery point, and I have a decent amount. I thought I had a decent amount of them banked up. This time the Russians are forced somewhat onto the offensive, or willing to take it up in some cases. For the first time, the Akashi table came into effect. I rolled a 1, which cost me a couple of my transport points. The only die roll that could do that. That meant I only got 14. I took a couple big divisions. That's really all I got left. I got an artillery piece, which could be useful. I used one last turn, I think, but I can't use it this turn because I'm just not attacking that much. I'm launching an attack back here. And you can see I've kind of penned the Russians in. If I take this space with the... I have all of this out of supply then, which means it has to shoot its way out of the bag. And there's not a lot of support coming from behind, so I can probably wipe out most of the Japanese force up there. Over here, I've got this poor guy who's stuck out of supply, so I threw in enough support to give a chance of shooting his way out up here, I think. These guys up here, I didn't want to move them because I don't want to give the Japanese a chance of circumventing, but they don't have a supply route right now. Oh yes they do. It doesn't have to be down through the road here. If you don't like going through those enemy occupied cities, it can be done through there. So yeah, I haven't blocked all the pathways through the mountains, so since one's open, the Japanese have full supply in the backfield there, and that's pretty unpleasant in the sense that if they ever break through, they're home free to do what they like. So we'll see what those results have. Down here at Port Arthur, the Russian plan is delay. They've spread their forces out. They're leaving them far forward to prevent all those artillery and heavy infantry from just punching right through. They've stacked these guys up with the intention of denying the important city to any kind of landing attack. And the Russians or the Japanese are just not going to be able to get much ground. They may get some victory points off killing units, but unless the Japanese perform the impossible up here in Manchuria, they're not going to come close to winning without taking Port Arthur. And good results for the Russians. This attack, which I wasn't even sure I needed to make because I had him surrounded anyway. Well, I made it. It was successful at causing an exchange retreat, which meant I pulled this guy out of the battle essentially by advancing from here and then to here, and then the other guy moved into place to complete the encirclement. And that took, some of their tools out of the way, gave me a couple victory points. I don't know if it was worthwhile. I could have just left them all tied up there. They wouldn't have anywhere they could move. They'd have to attack what's in front of them. But at the very least, this weak unit could have been attacked under that setup. Now, I've got all divisions in good terrain facing their units. They're going to have a hard time making their way out. And here, we managed to destroy, through a retreat, result. Remember, the Russian unit was here, the Japanese division that was up here in this forward position. And then we rearranged our line by pulling back with the advance and getting ourselves into a fairly strong position that I don't think the Japanese can break through. And we spent our replacement there, so we're ready to go into the last turn. And it looks like it's going to be a rough one for Japan. But I'm going to say, I don't find this the unbalanced game that I was led to believe, but it may be the addition of the naval rules is just enough of an edge to the Japanese to give them a really fair chance at it. I got a decent number of victory points off operation of the naval. Remember, I get 10 free naval points, and if you look at these, the Vladivostok fleet is going to generate a few victory points. The Port Arthur fleet sortie, it's not going to generate a lot of points. Overall, it's not going to generate those 10 Togo points that you start with. So there's a 10-point lead. I would say probably if you're going to play the land game, ignoring the Tsushima battle, which of course I don't see in front of me, so I can't make sure I'm pronouncing right, but which probably goes Japanese way. You got to give Japan at least a 10-point edge in the land game to match what's going on in the naval game. And, one or the other can be balanced, but they can't both be balanced, right? Oh, what's the answer when you know you've lost a game, which is the position the Japanese are in, but it's not quite over yet. And that's a good question. I mean, if you're playing opposed, you probably offer a concession at this point just to save everybody some time. If your opponent really wants to watch you beat your head against the wall, I guess they can, or do nothing. It doesn't really matter. This isn't like an East Front game where, geez, I didn't make it to my goals as Germany, and I know it's over. I know I'm not going to be able to hold out. Or victory in the Pacific, where one side gets to roll and then the other side gets to roll. No, the Japanese still have the military advantage. They can still beat up on the Russians. It's just there's no point in it. However, since I'm doing this solo, I'm not going to concede. It's the last turn. Yeah. And I'm trying to figure out, well, what can I do? And right now, one of the big problems is I only have 2 of these brigades left, which means I don't have the kind of force to throw myself in on the coast and attack for the important city. I can't punch through and reach even Liaoyang. So at this point it's kind of try to save the units that I can back here, and I try to score whatever points I can. And hey, maybe Tsushima will, score me. It's not going to score the 30 points I need. Right now I'm at 40 points with the combined 2 things. And, there's 20 of them sitting there. And the Japanese start paying their prices. They try to fight their way out of this pocket. They have no reinforcements they can bring into play. They pretty much lose everything. They're back about 3 victory points, I think, from where they started. They destroyed some Russian units. Mainly, though, they did damage along the line that didn't have any real effect. And then over here, they busted their way through. They're going to make it to Port Arthur, just not by the end of the game. Not by the time the Tsushima Navy is in place. And conceivably, they could be bringing enough reserves and Marines, etc., to actually make this a little uglier. But I don't see that being an issue. I mean, the Japanese are bound to win this fight. It's whether or not they win the game that's the only real question. So now the Russians get to move. They've got nothing they really have to do. They hold Port Arthur. It's a supply source for them. They can pull back along the line if they want. If they can pick off a point, hey, that's fine. But you know what? I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to handle the Tsushima attacks, the Navy engagement. I may, I'll move the Russians around. It may be a little interesting to see, how far around they can kind of maybe cut these Japanese off. Because if they do well enough here, Japan might lose their stomach for this fight. And Russia might continue pushing more troops out here. It's not like it's not like they're fully mobilized for this. Things aren't terribly different. The Russians solidified the line here. They pulled in another 3 victory points that I haven't scored yet, which drops the Japanese down to 19, plus the Togo points, 29, 34 total. That's including the 5 points on the board. Actually, there should be 5 more points, because we took this as well that I think I didn't count in. I think. I'm not sure. Okay. And what's really telling, though, is here, they've collapsed the entire front going into Korea. And that's a serious threat. There might be a garrison left behind, but I don't know how much that's going to stand up to a couple Russian divisions. And there are more Russian troops available to be committed. This line is pretty well held. I don't see the Japanese doing much successfully along here. I think the only place they're going to really succeed is in Port Arthur itself if you extended this out a few more turns. Whereas the Russians can do a couple of things, one of which is they could march down the coast and cut off the Japanese supply by slipping around behind them, thereby forcing them to fall back into the Port Arthur area. Another option would be to start sending forces into Korea and really disrupt the issue. I am going to handle that last battle of Tsushima. Now, you can look here, I've got the port marker for those. I haven't been bothering to roll for them. They probably would all be out by now, but everything gets repaired for Tsushima, which is why I haven't been bothering. So we'll stack that sucker up and take a look at what the shipping comparison looks like. I think the Russians have more ships at this point, and then see what the strategy ends up having as an effect, and what the total point swing for that is as well. Pairing the fleets is an interesting factor here. The Russians have a whole hell of a lot more battleships, but if we zoom in close enough to start seeing them, they have really lousy numbers in general on them, especially on the long-range guns, but even the medium-range. Certainly compared to the Japanese, but even compared to what the Russians had present here. I don't know. The Russian dead bag is rather full, but you can see most of the battleships that the Russians have were 3-3s in the old set as a destroyer. So that's about as good as they have here, but most of these are like 2-2s and somewhat weaker. I think the Russian strategy is going to be to try to keep it long range, though, because they're way outnumbered by cruisers and destroyers. And if the Japanese are able to close, which of course they can do full speed ahead both ways. To avoid that, maybe we want to consider trying to pick a choice that full speed ahead will result in crossing the T. This battle must occur. There's no option. No chances of, choices to back down or anything like that. The fight has to happen. A couple of other things. The Russian fleet might not all make it. They have to pass through the minefields, and it's going to be 4 rounds of combat. The Russians are prohibited from laying smoke, so they can't extend the range that way. And the minefields make this a far worse situation. So what the Russians want to do is they still want to keep the distance if possible. Of course, the Japanese still want to close. And if the Russians can't keep the distance, which they can't assure, I think they're in pretty bad shape. They don't have that huge numerical superiority on the battleships that they once did. Of course, that means less victory points that the Japanese could score off of it. All right, the tactics jets. Of course, we're stuck on 4 rounds, but we still do the tactics jets, I guess, which determine how many rounds there are. So that didn't really matter. But they came out, the Japanese did not go double full speed ahead. They took 1 full speed ahead to make sure. But they came out with crossing the T, which gets them 3 quick points. And again, these rules were written in a post-release as an extension available online. This is just not the way you do game production, right? If you're selling people a game and you give them something incomplete with the intention of filling it out later, that fill out later, yeah, it's going to end up being a piece of crap like this is, that's barely understandable, etc. Because there's no longer any product that you're selling people. This is just some sort of patch, which can then be patched. Computer game players are quite used to getting product that is going to be extended later, and it's often buggy. That's what happens when you do that kind of idea with board games as well. Anyway, with the T crossed, we're going to see the Russians in a lot of trouble here, I'm assuming, but not enough to make up for how badly the Japanese did on the land game. They really need to take Port Arthur, and I just moved too slowly there. Single round, it's hard to tell, but there are a number of damaged Japanese battleships. The Russian one is damaged. Here's our actual losses. Those are all going to be victory points, mostly in favor of the Japanese at this point. You feel like the maneuver chits probably should have been used multiple times, that it shouldn't just generate what the battle is going to be as a whole. That the fuel, etc., is all meant for a much more complex mini game that should have been built into this game. And unfortunately, that's not what they decided to release online, at least. Although, like I said, I think there is a copy of a translation of the Japanese naval rules available online at Board Game Geek and probably elsewhere. Which, given the choice of how you want to play this, I would say if you're going to go with a naval game, don't just do this. This is just really a dice fest. On the other hand, you may need to balance the points to make it reasonable, because it almost seems like the land game was designed with some view of the naval game, or maybe the naval game was designed with a view that the land game did not provide enough points to the Japanese. So here's something for those of you who complain, and it's kind of like, it uses the counters, even if it's pretty inane. Let's go to the second round. The Russians can't increase range. Japanese can't reduce range. It should be pretty much over. The only question is, whether or not another Japanese battleship or 2 goes down. All right, well, the Japanese did not. I think they lost 1 of their battleships, which means we're at 3 battleships down for them. 3 for the Russians, another 4 for the Russians. So that's just, a net of 4 more Togo points here. And now we combine those for some reason to 46, which is well under what we needed. We needed another 24 points. 20 of them sitting here. We were doing well enough before that 20 would have put us above, but the Japanese started taking casualties in the ground game that they couldn't recover, primarily around here. If I had another, you know, if that extra turn, if I skipped a turn, that might have been the game. Because clearly I've got enough force in here at this point that I think I could swing around and hit Port Arthur from the north. The guns could come up by rail as far as here. They're not going to get any closer, so I don't know. It's not that likely, actually. This is still pretty heavily defended. And is that enough? No, that's not quite enough point-wise, but I probably wouldn't have panicked with the Japanese and taken the risky maneuvers that I did towards the end when I realized I don't think I'm getting Port Arthur this game. All right, I'll come back with a review.